My brother tried to make me abandon my dying wife for a casino cruise on the day of her final Christmas celebration. When I refused, he crashed her funeral drunk and stole her father's watch from our house while we buried her. I was in the middle of grieving when I learned my brother would steal a dying woman's final moments to feed his addiction. Abigail had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in March. The doctors gave her 3 to 4 months. By June, she weighed 90 pounds, and I hadn't left the hospital in weeks. I slept in the chair next to her bed and held her hand through the pain that morphine couldn't touch. Our daughter Juliet was planning something special for July 20th. Christmas in July, since Abigail wouldn't make it to December. She'd been coordinating with our grandkids who lived across the country. Abigail's eyes lit up when she talked about seeing them one more time. She whispered to Juliet that she was terrified of dying alone while I was in the bathroom. That's when Jerry called. Got us spots on a casino cruise, he said like he was doing me a favor. Brothers only. No ball and chains allowed. I told him I couldn't leave Abigail. She has nurses for that. What are you, her servant? The cruise was July 20th, the same day as Abigail's Christmas. I can't go, I said. You're pathetic, Jerry spat. You know what your problem is? You're going to spend our inheritance on medical bills for a lost cause. Take her treatment money and double it at the casino. She'll be dead anyway. I hung up on him. He texted me constantly after that. Called me whipped. Said real men don't waste their lives watching someone rot. Posted on Facebook about giving me a chance to remember who I was before the ball and chain. The family started taking his side. Aunt Helen said Abigail would understand if I needed closure with my brother. Uncle Joe reminded me that a man needs his brother because wives come and go. Even Jerry's wife texted Juliet saying I needed to think about life after Abigail. I found Abigail trying to fill out DNR papers alone at 3 a.m. one night. She'd overheard me arguing with Jerry on the phone. If you need to go, I understand, she said. I know this is too much. She was crying. My wife, who'd been so strong through everything, was sobbing because she thought I wanted to leave her. Maybe you should go. I don't want to trap you. She'd written me a note absolving me if I left, like she was doing me a favor by dying alone. That's when I knew what Jerry had done. He'd made my dying wife feel like a burden. Juliet and I started planning. We told everyone we were working on logistics. I told Jerry I needed to think about it, but behind the scenes, Juliet was mobilizing an army. She contacted every couple who knew our love story. Abigail's oncology team who'd watched me sleep in that chair for months. The priest who married us 35 years ago. My coworkers who knew I'd used every vacation day sitting with Abigail. Her book club. The cancer support group for spouses. Even Jerry's ex-wife wanted to help. July 20th came fast. Jerry started texting at 7 a.m. Real men keep their word. Car leaves at 10. At 9 a.m. he wrote, she won't even remember if you're there. At 10 a.m. it was, you're pathetic. Enslaved by a dying woman. I turned off my phone and helped Abigail get ready. I washed her hair and helped her into the dress she wore to Juliet's wedding. She was so thin it hung off her, but she smiled when she saw herself in the mirror. You look beautiful, I told her. Liar, she laughed. The hospital had transformed the family lounge. They'd recreated our honeymoon suite decorations. Our wedding songs played softly. Photos from our 35 years together covered the walls. When I wheeled Abigail in, 200 people stood and applauded. Every nurse on the floor was there in formal wear. Abigail's doctors, our friends, the couples from support group, everyone who'd watched our story unfold. Abigail saw the grandkids running toward her in Christmas pajamas and started crying. I got down on one knee next to her wheelchair. Abigail Marie, will you marry me again? She couldn't speak through the tears, but she nodded. The priest performed a renewal ceremony right there. I slipped her wedding ring back on her finger. It was too big now, but she clutched it tight. The grandkids helped us cut a Christmas cake. I held her as we slow danced to our song. Meanwhile, Jerry was live streaming from an empty minibus. The cruise needed 20 people minimum. 3 showed up. He ranted about how I chose my chain over family. The cruise was canceled. He drove to the hospital demanding I reimburse his deposit. Security stopped him at the door. This was a private event. Through the glass doors, he could see me holding Abigail as we danced. See the room full of people celebrating our love. His son was in there. He'd been one of the 3 people who didn't show up for the cruise. Jerry pounded on the glass, but nobody looked. Abigail died August 3rd in my arms. She spent her last breath talking about our perfect Christmas. Her send-off was perfect, but what wasn't perfect was the funeral, because even though Jerry wasn't invited, he took it upon himself to come crash it, forcing me to cause a scene at Abigail's funeral. Jerry pushed past the funeral director, his face red and sweaty from the August heat. He stumbled down the aisle between the pews, reeking of whiskey and cigarette smoke. The entire congregation turned to stare as he made his way toward Abigail's casket. I stood up from the front pew, my hands shaking. Juliet grabbed my arm, trying to hold me back, but I pulled away. This was my wife's funeral, the woman who'd spent her last months being made to feel like a burden by my brother. I wasn't going to let him ruin this too. Jerry reached the casket and turned to face everyone. He swayed slightly, gripping the edge for balance. The priest stepped forward, but Jerry waved him off. I moved into the aisle, blocking his path to the podium. Jerry sneered at me, then raised his voice to address the room. He started rambling about family loyalty and how blood was thicker than water, how I'd chosen a dying woman over my own brother. The congregation shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Aunt Helen covered her face with her hands. Uncle Joe stared at the floor. I walked up to Jerry and put my hand on his shoulder. He shrugged it off violently, nearly knocking over a flower arrangement. The funeral director appeared at my side, whispering that he could call security if needed. I shook my head. This was a family matter. Jerry continued his speech, getting louder and more incoherent. He talked about the canceled cruise, the money he'd lost, how I owed him, how Abigail had manipulated me, turned me against my own blood. Several people got up and left. Others pulled out their phones, recording the spectacle. That's when Juliet stood up. She walked past me, straight up to Jerry, and slapped him across the face. The sound echoed through the chapel. Jerry stumbled backward, shocked into silence. She told him to leave. Her voice was steady, controlled, but I could see her hands trembling. Jerry laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. He said she was just like her mother, controlling and manipulative. That's when Jerry's son stood up from the back row and walked out without a word. The funeral director stepped in then, firmly escorting Jerry toward the door. Jerry fought him the whole way, shouting about his rights, about family, about the money I supposedly owed him. As they reached the exit, he turned back and yelled that this wasn't over, that he'd get what was his. The chapel fell silent after he left. I stood there, frozen, staring at Abigail's casket. The priest cleared his throat and suggested we take a brief recess. People filed out quietly, some stopping to squeeze my shoulder or whisper condolences. I sat back down in the front pew, my head in my hands. Juliet sat beside me, her arm around my shoulders. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say. Jerry had turned even this sacred moment into something ugly. After 15 minutes, people began filing back in. The service resumed, subdued but dignified. The priest spoke beautifully about Abigail's grace, her strength, her love for family. Friends shared memories. Juliet read a poem her mother had loved. I couldn't bring myself to speak. Every time I opened my mouth, I thought of Jerry's intrusion, and the words died in my throat. The burial was private, family only. Jerry didn't show, thank God. As we lowered Abigail into the ground, I thought about her final months, how she'd worried about being a burden, how Jerry had amplified those fears, how even in death he couldn't let her have peace. Back at the house, people gathered for the reception. The dining room table was covered with casseroles and sympathy cards. I couldn't eat. I stood in the corner, accepting condolences and trying not to think about Jerry's threats. That's when I noticed things were missing. Abigail's jewelry box wasn't on the dresser. The silver frame with our wedding photo was gone from the mantel. Small things, but meaningful. Things Jerry knew had sentimental value. Juliet noticed too. She went through the house, making a mental inventory. More items were missing. Nothing valuable enough to call the police over, but each absence felt like a violation. Jerry had been here. While we were at the cemetery, he'd let himself in and taken pieces of Abigail. I found him that evening at his apartment. He answered the door with a smirk, Abigail's jewelry box visible on the table behind him. He said I owed him for the cruise money, that these were just collateral until I paid up, that Abigail wouldn't need them anyway. I turned and left without a word. Violence wouldn't solve anything. It wouldn't bring Abigail back or undo the pain Jerry had caused. But as I drove home, I knew this was far from over. Jerry had crossed a line at the funeral, and now he was holding my wife's memories hostage. The next few days passed in a blur. I tried to focus on grieving, on processing the loss of my wife of 35 years, but Jerry made that impossible. Jerry showing up at the casino cruise alone on that live stream makes me wonder if he knew all along nobody would really come. The way he's acting seems less about brotherhood and more about something else entirely. Maybe he needs money or attention right now. He called constantly, demanding money. He posted on Facebook about how I'd abandoned family for a woman who was already gone. He even contacted Abigail's life insurance company, claiming he was owed a portion as my next of kin. The insurance company called me, confused. The policy was clear. Everything went to me and Juliet. But Jerry had been persistent, even threatening legal action. They advised me to get a lawyer, just in case. I didn't want lawyers. I didn't want courts. I just wanted to mourn my wife in peace. But Jerry wouldn't allow that. Every day brought new harassment, new demands, new violations of Abigail's memory. Juliet suggested we change the locks, but I hesitated. Despite everything, Jerry was still my brother. Part of me hoped he'd come to his senses, realize what he was doing. But as days turned into weeks, that hope faded. The breaking point came when Jerry showed up at Abigail's grave. I'd gone to place fresh flowers and found him there, taking photos. He said he was documenting evidence for his lawyer. Evidence of what? I didn't know. But seeing him there, at her resting place, using her death as ammunition in whatever scheme he was plotting, something inside me snapped. I told him to leave. He refused. Said he had as much right to be there as I did. That Abigail was family to him too, even if I'd tried to exclude him. The groundskeeper eventually intervened, but the damage was done. Even in death, Abigail couldn't find peace from Jerry's intrusions. That night, Juliet and I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by legal documents and insurance papers. She'd been researching our options, ways to protect ourselves and Abigail's memory from Jerry's escalating behavior. But every path seemed to lead to lawyers and courts, exactly what Abigail wouldn't have wanted. As we talked, my phone buzzed with another text from Jerry. This time, he'd attached a photo of himself wearing Abigail's father's watch, another item he'd taken from the house. The message read, "Dad would have wanted me to have this. You got everything else." I stared at the photo, remembering how Abigail had kept that watch in her bedside drawer, how she'd held it during her treatments, drawing comfort from her father's memory. Now Jerry was using it as a prop in his campaign of harassment. Juliet saw the text, and her face hardened. She said we needed to take action, to stop letting Jerry control the narrative, but I was exhausted. Grief was hard enough without having to fight my own brother every step of the way. As I prepared for bed that night, I found myself talking to Abigail's photo on the nightstand, telling her about Jerry, about the funeral, about how sorry I was that even her final goodbye had been tainted by his selfishness. I fell asleep, clutching her pillow, which still smelled faintly of her perfume. The war with Jerry was just beginning, and I had no idea how far he would go, or how much more he would try to take. But one thing was certain, he'd already stolen too much. Abigail's final months, her funeral, her peace. I couldn't let him take anything else. The morning after I clutched Abigail's pillow, Jerry's campaign intensified. I woke to find my mailbox stuffed with printed screenshots from social media. Jerry had created a narrative painting me as the villain who'd isolated a dying woman from her loving family. Each post twisted reality further. The Christmas in July became me forcing a sick woman to perform for my ego. The renewal ceremony became manipulation of a woman too weak to refuse. I gathered the papers with trembling hands. Neighbors watched from their windows. Mrs. Chen from next door quickly looked away when our eyes met. The damage was spreading beyond family. Inside, Juliet was already on her laptop, documenting everything. She showed me how Jerry had tagged extended family members, old friends, even people from my workplace. The comments were split. Some defended us, sharing their own memories of visiting Abigail. Others questioned why Jerry hadn't been invited to the renewal ceremony if family was so important. My phone rang. My supervisor wanted to discuss the situation. Jerry had sent screenshots to my company's HR department, claiming I'd abandoned work responsibilities to play nursemaid. Never mind that I'd used legitimate vacation time. Never mind that the company had sent flowers to Abigail's funeral. Jerry's version painted me as an employee who'd exploited sympathy to avoid work. The meeting was scheduled for that afternoon. I spent the morning gathering documentation, approved time-off forms, emails from HR expressing support, cards from co-workers, evidence to counter Jerry's lies. It felt wrong, having to defend the time I'd spent with my dying wife. Juliet drove me to the office. She waited in the parking lot, ready to provide backup if needed. Inside, I found not just my supervisor, but the head of HR and another manager I barely knew. They'd printed Jerry's emails. The stack was thick. The conversation was professional but uncomfortable. They assured me my job wasn't in jeopardy, but they needed to address the allegations. I spread my documentation across the conference table. Each approved form, each supportive email felt like a small victory against Jerry's campaign. My supervisor's expression softened as she reviewed everything. The HR director nodded, making notes. They'd known the truth all along, but Jerry's persistence had forced this formal review. Another hour of my life stolen by his vindictiveness. Driving home, Juliet's phone buzzed constantly. Family members were choosing sides. Cousin Marie called Jerry pathetic. Cousin David said I should have included Jerry more. Aunt Helen sent a long message about how family should forgive each other. Uncle Joe remained silent, which felt like its own statement. At home, we found more missing items. Abigail's reading glasses from the kitchen counter, the anniversary clock from the living living room. Small things Jerry must have taken during previous visits before we'd realized his intentions. Each absence was a fresh wound. That evening, Jerry appeared at the door with Aunt Helen and Uncle Joe. I watched through the peephole as they stood on my porch. Jerry held a folder, looking pleased with himself. Aunt Helen seemed uncomfortable. Uncle Joe stared at his shoes. I didn't answer. They knocked again, harder. Jerry called out that they had important family business to discuss, that hiding wouldn't solve anything, that real men faced their problems. Juliet joined me at the door, peering through the side window. She shook her head. We didn't need to let them in, but Aunt Helen's presence complicated things. She'd been at Abigail's bedside too. She'd seen our love story unfold. After 10 minutes, they left. Jerry kicked our garden gnome on his way out. It shattered on the walkway. Aunt Helen touched his arm, trying to calm him. Uncle Joe picked up the broken pieces, arranging them neatly by the door. Within an hour, Jerry posted about being denied entry to his childhood home, how I'd turned our parents' house into a fortress, how grief had made me cruel to family. The comments started immediately. Juliet and I spent the evening creating our own documentation, photos of Abigail's missing items, screenshots of Jerry's harassment, records of his calls and texts, building a case we hoped we'd never need to present. My sister Patricia called from Arizona. She'd been monitoring the situation from afar, trying to stay neutral. But Jerry had crossed a line by involving her children in his posts, claiming I'd denied them their last chance to see Abigail. Patricia knew the truth. Her kids had visited in June, spending precious hours with their grandmother. Patricia's anger gave me strength. She started calling other relatives, sharing her perspective. The tide began shifting slightly. Family members who'd remained silent started speaking up. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. Jerry responded by escalating further. He showed up at Abigail's book club meeting, telling the women how I'd controlled her final months. The club president, Nancy, called me afterward. The women had asked him to leave when he couldn't answer basic questions about Abigail's favorite books. His performance had backfired. Still, the damage accumulated. Some book club members wondered if there was truth to his claims. Others felt uncomfortable with the family drama. The club that had brought Abigail such joy was now tainted by Jerry's interference. I found myself driving past Jerry's apartment complex at odd hours, checking if Abigail's things were visible through his windows. Once, I saw him on his balcony, wearing her father's watch while drinking beer. He waved when he spotted my car, that same smirk on his face. Juliet worried about my late-night drives. She suggested we focus on moving forward, on healing. But how could I heal when pieces of Abigail were held hostage? When her memory was being twisted daily? The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Jerry's ex-wife Linda called with information. During their divorce, Jerry had pulled similar stunts, taking her deceased mother's belongings, creating false narratives about her family. She documented everything but never pursued it legally. Now she wanted to help. Linda met us at a coffee shop, bringing a box of evidence from her own battle with Jerry. Photos of him with her mother's jewelry, screenshots of his lies during their divorce, a pattern of behavior spanning years. She'd watched our story unfold on social media, recognizing his tactics. Her documentation was meticulous. She'd learned to protect herself through careful record keeping. She showed us how Jerry recycled the same phrases, the same accusations, how he always positioned himself as the victim of controlling women. We spent hours reviewing Linda's materials. She'd kept recordings of his threats, copies of forged documents he'd created, evidence of items he'd sold after taking them. Jerry contacting the life insurance company pretending he deserves money from Abigail's policy is absolutely wild. The nerve of this guy keeps reaching new levels. Now he's harassing insurance companies and threatening lawyers over money that was never his. A clear pattern of manipulation and theft, always targeting grieving families. Linda's courage inspired others. Jerry's son Marcus reached out, wanting to talk. We met at a park where he shared his own experiences, years of watching his father manipulate situations, twist reality, hurt people who loved him. Marcus had stayed silent out of loyalty, but watching Jerry attack Abigail's memory was too much. Marcus revealed that Jerry had been selling Abigail's items online. He showed us listings, her jewelry box, the silver frame, other precious memories being auctioned to strangers. Each listing included fabricated stories about the item's origins, erasing Abigail's connection to them. We printed the listings, adding them to our growing documentation. Juliet created a spreadsheet tracking everything, dates, times, values, Jerry's lies about each item. The evidence was overwhelming, but what could we do with it? The answer came during Sunday dinner at Patricia's friend's house. She'd flown in to support us, bringing her husband and children. As we shared a meal, her kids talked about their last visit with Abigail, how she told them stories, shared her wisdom, made them feel loved despite her pain. Patricia's husband, a practical man who rarely showed emotion, suggested we stop playing defense. Jerry thrived on our reactions, our attempts to counter his lies. What if we simply shared the truth instead? That night, Juliet and I crafted a different approach. Instead of responding to Jerry's attacks, we'd celebrate Abigail's life. We'd share real stories, real photos, real memories. Let the truth speak louder than his lies. We started with the book club. I attended their next meeting, bringing Abigail's annotated copies of their selections, her handwriting in the margins, her thoughts on each story. The women passed the books around, touching the pages where she'd left her mark. Nancy suggested creating a memorial library in Abigail's honor. Next, we reached out to the hospital staff. The nurses who'd cared for Abigail wanted to share their memories. They'd seen our love story firsthand, witnessed Jerry's absence during those difficult months. Dr. Martinez wrote a beautiful tribute about Abigail's grace during treatment. The cancer support group organized a remembrance evening. Spouses who'd walked similar paths shared how Abigail had encouraged them. Her strength had inspired others facing loss. Jerry's narrative of a manipulated woman crumbled against their testimonies. Jerry noticed the shift. His posts became more frantic, his accusations wilder. He claimed we were orchestrating a smear campaign against him, that we turned Abigail's death into a weapon. The irony wasn't lost on anyone paying attention. He started showing up at places connected to Abigail, her favorite restaurant, where he told staff I'd restricted her diet during treatment, the library where she'd volunteered, claiming I'd forced her to quit. Each location, another attempt to rewrite history, but people remembered Abigail. The restaurant manager recalled how I'd brought her soup when she could barely eat. The library director had visited her in the hospital, knowing how much she missed her volunteer work. Jerry's lies met resistance from those who'd witnessed the truth. Still, he persisted. He contacted Abigail's estranged cousin in Florida, spinning tales of family division. He reached out to her college roommate, claiming I'd isolated Abigail from old friends. Each contact required energy to counter, time stolen from grieving. Juliet suggested we host a memorial gathering, not a funeral, but a celebration of Abigail's life. We'd invite everyone who'd known her, share stories, display photos, create an event Jerry couldn't couldn't crash without revealing his true nature. Planning became therapeutic. We collected photos from throughout Abigail's life. Friends contributed memories. The hospital offered their conference room. The book club volunteered to handle refreshments. Our community rallied around preserving Abigail's true legacy. Jerry learned about the memorial through social media. His reaction was predictable. Accusations of excluding family, claims we were profiting from Abigail's death. But his influence was waning. People had seen too much, witnessed his patterns. He tried recruiting flying monkeys to attend on his behalf. Most refused, tired of the drama. A few agreed, but backed out when they learned the event's true nature. Jerry was becoming isolated in his campaign. The week before the memorial, Jerry made his biggest mistake. He created a fake social media account pretending to be Abigail, posted messages about feeling trapped, wanting freedom, regretting her choices. The posts were clearly written by someone who didn't know her voice. The backlash was immediate. Friends reported the account. Family members who'd stayed neutral expressed disgust. Even Aunt Helen called him, demanding he stop. Using a dead woman's identity crossed a line even his supporters couldn't ignore. But Jerry doubled down. He claimed I'd forced Abigail to cut ties with him, that she'd wanted him at the renewal ceremony but I'd forbidden it. His lies grew more elaborate, more desperate. Marcus visited again, this time with his sister Emma. They decided to attend the memorial despite their father's objections. They wanted to honor the step-grandmother who'd shown them kindness when their own family was fractured. Emma brought something unexpected. A letter Abigail had written to her years ago. Encouragement during Emma's difficult teenage years. Words of wisdom about choosing love over bitterness. The letter revealed Abigail's awareness of Jerry's nature. Her hope that his children would choose differently. We made copies of the letter for the memorial. Abigail's own words countering Jerry's false narrative. Her compassion for his children despite his treatment of our family. Evidence of the woman she truly was. Jerry's desperation peaked. He started calling relatives at all hours, demanding they boycott the memorial. He threatened to expose family secrets if they attended. His behavior became erratic enough that several family members blocked his number. Uncle Joe finally broke his silence. He called to apologize for enabling Jerry. He believed blood loyalty meant supporting family regardless of behavior. But watching Jerry dishonor Abigail's memory had opened his eyes. The memorial approached amid this chaos. We finalized preparations while fielding Jerry's escalating harassment. He sent registered letters with vague legal threats. He left voicemails alternating between rage and manipulation. His campaign was failing, and he knew it. 3 days before the memorial, I discovered Jerry had been visiting estate sales, buying items similar to those he'd stolen. He planned to return fake replacements, claiming he'd never taken anything. Marcus warned us after overhearing his father's scheme. We photographed Abigail's remaining possessions, creating a detailed inventory, serial numbers, distinguishing marks, anything that would prove authenticity, protection against Jerry's next move. The night before the memorial, exhaustion overwhelmed me. Months of fighting Jerry while grieving Abigail had taken its toll. Juliet found me in the garage, sitting in Abigail's car, breathing in the faint scent of her perfume that still lingered. She sat with me in silence. No words were needed. We both missed Abigail. We both wished Jerry would simply let us mourn. But tomorrow we'd celebrate her life surrounded by those who truly loved her. As we prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with one final message from Jerry. A photo of him at Abigail's grave, holding flowers. His attempt to appear like a grieving brother-in-law, but the timestamp revealed his deception. The photo was taken at night, when the cemetery was closed. Even his grief was performative. I deleted the message without responding. Tomorrow belonged to Abigail, not Jerry. Her true legacy would shine through the people whose lives she'd touched. Jerry could stage all the photos he wanted. Those who mattered knew the truth. The war with Jerry was far from over. His harassment would likely continue, but surrounded by evidence of Abigail's real impact, supported by those who'd witnessed our love, I felt ready to face whatever came next. Jerry had stolen precious items, but he couldn't steal the memories, the love, the truth of who Abigail was. The memorial morning arrived with Jerry's van parked across from our house. I watched from the bedroom window as he sat there, engine running, occasionally lifting binoculars to study our front door. Juliet was already downstairs, arranging the photo boards we'd transport to the hospital. By 9 o'clock, relatives began arriving to help with setup. Patricia and her family pulled into the driveway first. Jerry's van door opened. He stepped out wearing a black suit, holding a bouquet of roses. Patricia's husband immediately positioned himself between Jerry and the house, while Patricia ushered her children inside. I went downstairs to find Aunt Helen in my kitchen, wringing her hands. She explained that Jerry had called her at dawn, begging her to mediate. She'd agreed to come early, hoping to prevent a scene. Uncle Joe stood behind her, looking uncomfortable in his dress shoes. Jerry knocked on the door. Through the window, I could see him practicing facial expressions, settling on what he probably thought looked like grief. Aunt Helen pleaded with her eyes. I shook my head and returned to loading photos into boxes. The knocking became pounding. Jerry's voice carried through the door, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. He demanded his rightful place at the memorial, claimed I was dishonoring Abigail's memory by excluding family. Mrs. DeChen peered through her curtains next door. Patricia's husband stepped outside to confront Jerry. Their conversation was brief. Jerry gestured wildly, while Patricia's husband remained calm, arms crossed. Eventually, Jerry retreated to his van, but didn't leave. He sat there, watching, waiting. Jerry's grand finale involves camping outside their house with binoculars like some discount detective movie villain, while practicing sad faces in his van mirror. Truly, the performance of a lifetime. We finished loading the cars under Jerry's surveillance. Each trip to the driveway felt like running a gauntlet. He rolled down his window, calling out accusations. Aunt Helen tried approaching his van once, but he rolled up the window in her face. The drive to the hospital became a procession. Our 3 cars moved in formation while Jerry's van followed at a distance. At red lights, I could see him in my rearview mirror, gripping the steering wheel, his jaw clenched. At the hospital, we unloaded quickly. Jerry parked in the visitor lot but stayed in his van. Through the glass doors, I watched him make phone calls, his gestures growing more animated with each conversation. The conference room transformation took 2 hours. We arranged photos chronologically along the walls. Abigail as a young bride, holding baby Juliet, teaching her book club, celebrating anniversaries. Each image countered Jerry's false narrative with visual truth. Nancy and the book club arrived with homemade refreshments. They'd created a memory book, each member contributing a page about what Abigail meant to them. Dr. Martinez brought a framed photo of the entire oncology staff with Abigail from her last chemotherapy session. Jerry entered the hospital lobby at 11:30. Security had been briefed about the situation. They watched him pace near the information desk, clutching his wilted roses. He approached the desk multiple times, likely asking about the memorial location, but was turned away. Marcus and Emma arrived through the emergency emergency entrance to avoid their father. They brought their own photos, family gatherings where Abigail had welcomed them, despite the complicated dynamics. Emma carried the original letter Abigail had written her, protected in a clear sleeve. The memorial began at noon. Over 100 people filled the conference room. Nurses who'd worked night shifts came in on their day off. Couples from the support group brought tissues and hugs. Even the hospital chaplain attended, though this wasn't a religious service. We shared stories without formal speeches. People simply stood when moved to share a memory. The book club president described how Abigail had continued attending meetings via video call from her hospital bed, still offering insights on their latest selection despite her pain. A commotion erupted in the hallway. Through the glass panel in the door, we could see Jerry arguing with security. He'd somehow gotten past the lobby and found the conference room. His face was red, spittle flying as he gestured at the guards. The room fell silent, everyone turning toward the disturbance. Some looked at me, wondering if I'd intervene. I remained seated, holding Juliet's hand. This was Abigail's day, not Jerry's. Security escorted Jerry away, but his shouts echoed down the corridor. He yelled about family rights, about being excluded from his sister-in-law's memorial, about the money I'd stolen from him. Several memorial attendees shook their heads in disgust. Marcus stood up after his father's voice faded. He shared how Abigail had never made him and Emma feel like outsiders, despite their father's behavior. How she'd sent them birthday cards every year, each with a handwritten note of encouragement. The memorial continued for 2 more hours. People laughed at funny memories, cried at touching ones. The hospital staff shared stories of finding me asleep in Abigail's room, my hand still holding hers. They'd covered me with blankets and worked quietly around us. As the gathering wound down, people approached with offers of support. The book club invited me to attend meetings whenever I felt ready. The support group reminded me their doors were always open. Dr. Martinez pulled me aside to say Abigail had been one of the strongest patients he'd ever treated. We packed up slowly, not wanting the afternoon to end. Each photo was carefully wrapped, each memory preserved. Aunt Helen helped, tears streaming down her face. She whispered an apology for Jerry's behavior, for not seeing the truth sooner. Outside, Jerry's van was gone, but he'd left his mark. Our cars had been keyed, long scratches running along the sides. Patricia's husband photographed the damage while Uncle Joe called the police. I felt too drained to care about paint. The drive home was quiet. Juliet navigated while I stared out the window, processing the day. Despite Jerry's attempts at disruption, we'd honored Abigail properly. Her true story had been told by those who'd actually known her. At home, we found Jerry's roses scattered across our lawn, petals torn and stems broken. He'd also left a note under the door, a rambling manifesto about family betrayal and stolen inheritance. I added it to our growing documentation file. That evening, relatives gathered at our house for an informal dinner. Patricia's family, Marcus and Emma, Aunt Helen and Uncle Joe, and several cousins filled the space with warmth. We ate Abigail's favorite lasagna recipe and shared more stories. Jerry appeared on the front lawn around 8 o'clock. He stood there, swaying slightly, shouting up at the windows. The neighbors came out to watch. Mr. Chen threatened to call the police if Jerry didn't leave. Jerry responded by throwing a rock at our living room window. It bounced off, but left a small crack. Uncle Joe had seen enough. He marched outside, got in Jerry's face, and delivered what looked like a harsh lecture. Jerry shoved him, and Uncle Joe shoved back harder. Jerry stumbled, fell on the grass, and lay there dramatically claiming assault. Mrs. Chen had already called the police. They arrived to find Jerry still on our lawn, now singing off-key songs about brotherly love. The officers recognized him from previous calls. They helped him up, checked his ID, and strongly suggested he leave. Jerry demanded they arrest Uncle Joe for assault. The officers looked at Uncle Joe, then at Jerry, then at the gathering crowd of witnesses. They informed Jerry that public intoxication and disturbing the peace were arrestable offenses. He finally stumbled back to his van and drove away. Inside, the family continued dinner. Emma sat next to me, quietly sharing more memories of Abigail. How she taught Emma to knit during a particularly difficult summer. How those knitting sessions had become a safe space to talk about family problems. Marcus pulled me aside later. He'd been monitoring his father's online activities. Jerry had joined several groups for victims of family alienation and was sharing increasingly wild versions of events. But the groups were skeptical. His stories kept changing, contradicting themselves. As guests prepared to leave, each offered support. Aunt Helen hugged me tightly, whispering that she'd handle Jerry. Uncle Joe shook my hand firmly, promising to stand by us. Patricia made plans to stay another week, wanting to help sort through Abigail's belongings properly. The house felt empty after everyone left. Juliet and I sat in the living room, surrounded by sympathy cards and memorial photos. The cracked window let in a cool breeze. Neither of us moved to cover it. My phone buzzed with a message from Linda. She'd seen photos from the memorial online and was glad we'd celebrated Abigail properly. She also warned that Jerry had reached out to her, fishing for information to use against me. She'd blocked him immediately. Over the following days, Jerry's harassment shifted tactics. He stopped the direct confrontations, but began filing complaints with various agencies. Adult Protective Services showed up, investigating claims that I'd financially abused Abigail. The investigator quickly determined the complaint was baseless. He contacted the IRS, suggesting I'd hidden assets. He called the health department, claiming the memorial had violated some regulations. Each agency had to follow up, wasting everyone's time. But patterns emerged, and Jerry's credibility evaporated with each false report. The breaking point came when Jerry tried to contest Abigail's will. He'd found a lawyer willing to take his case, arguing undue influence. The lawyer quickly dropped him after reviewing the facts and realizing Jerry had no standing. Abigail's will was ironclad, witnessed by medical staff. Marcus called with news that Jerry had been evicted from his apartment for disturbing other tenants. He'd been ranting in the hallways about stolen inheritance. The landlord had received multiple complaints and finally had enough. Jerry moved into a motel on the outskirts of town. He continued posting online, but his audience dwindled. Family members blocked him. His own children refused contact. Even the alienation support groups banned him for harassment of other members. I returned to work gradually, finding comfort in routine. Coworkers who'd seen Jerry's posts offered quiet support. My supervisor apologized for the formal investigation, assuring me it had only strengthened their respect for how I'd cared for Abigail. The scratches on our cars became a strange symbol of survival. Juliet suggested we leave them unrepaired for now, battle scars from protecting Abigail's memory. Every time I saw them, I remembered that we'd won by simply telling the truth. Patricia helped us pack Abigail's clothes for donation. We found notes she'd hidden in pockets, little love messages for me to discover later. Each one felt like a gift from beyond. We framed our favorites, creating a new memorial wall in the hallway. Jerry made one final attempt at reconciliation through Aunt Helen. He claimed to be entering therapy, wanting to make amends, but Aunt Helen had learned to recognize his patterns. patterns. She declined to pass along his message, protecting us from another manipulation. We held a small gathering on what would have been Abigail's birthday. Just close family and friends, sharing cake and memories. No drama, no intrusions, just love. Someone mentioned they hadn't heard from Jerry in weeks. The silence felt like freedom. I started attending the widowers support group, not ready to share yet, but finding comfort in others' stories. The facilitator had heard about our situation through the hospital grapevine. He assured me that protecting a loved one's memory was part of honoring them. Juliet returned to her own life gradually, though she checked on me daily. We established new routines, Sunday dinners, Wednesday phone calls. She'd inherited her mother's strength and her father's stubbornness. Abigail would have been proud. The house felt different now, still empty without Abigail, but no longer under siege. I could grieve properly, remember freely. Her photos smiled from every room. Her books lined the shelves. Her garden bloomed with the flowers she'd planted. Jerry faded into the background of our lives. Occasionally, someone would mention seeing him around town, looking disheveled and bitter, but he'd lost his power to hurt us. His theft of Abigail's items became irrelevant compared to the memories he could never steal. I kept Abigail's pillow on her side of the bed, her perfume bottle on the nightstand. Not shrines to grief, but reminders of love. Sometimes I'd tell her about my day, about how her story had touched so many people, about how Jerry's lies had crumbled against the truth of who she was. The war with Jerry had ended not with a dramatic confrontation, but with quiet persistence. We'd protected Abigail's memory by living it, sharing it, celebrating it. Every person who'd truly known her became a guardian of her legacy. Together, we'd ensured that her final months were remembered for the love they contained, not the chaos Jerry tried to create. Thanks for reading this story with me. It's been wonderful sharing these moments together. I hope you have a great day filled with love and good memories.